This is going to be kind of a teardown and overview of these N64 sticks from the Nintendo controller collection thing or whatever they're calling it. Basically, they sell these in capsule machines in Japan, and they're just little keychain things that you can play with that don't really do anything else. I grabbed a couple of these because N64 is my favorite console of all time, and I'm very particular about its analog sticks, so I was curious to see if the parts inside could be used for real N64 controllers. So for years, I've been refurbishing N64 sticks by hand using OEM parts because I haven't really found a good alternative that I'm happy with. But I was curious to see if you finally had a good source of original parts with this. So for those of you who are just wondering if you can use these to restore an original N64 stick that's really worn out, the short answer, I'll tell you right now, is no. I mean, some of the parts are interchangeable and the mechanisms inside are pretty similar, but you're not going to be able to bring a stick back into good condition using only these parts. Like, it's only some of it's going to be usable. So for those of you who are just looking to restore your N64 sticks, I'll leave a link in the description to the video I've been using for years. I've tried just about everything, and this is the only method I've had good results with. But anyway, looking at the toy stick itself, which I'll be referring to this as the toy stick and the N64 original as the original stick. Basically, the toy stick is got a pretty reasonably similar look and feel to the original, but it's not quite perfect. I mean, in terms of looks, the most obvious difference is that the hole in the middle of the stick has been filled in and the ridges around the cap are slightly thicker. So it's close, but not quite. In terms of feel, it's, again, reasonably close in the way it moves around, but there's kind of a textured feel when the stick moves around the gate, for lack of a better term. It doesn't feel quite as smooth as an original stick in good shape, but it's reasonably close, I'd say. Which I will say one positive thing about the toy stick is that it does appear to actually have some lubricant inside, which is useful. If they did that for the original sticks, we might not have them wearing out so quickly. But yeah, that's one nice thing about the toy sticks. So basically, when an N64 stick gets worn out, there's two main causes that happen when it gets used over time. So basically, the first thing is the white bowl that the stick moves around in when you move the stick around. This kind of gets worn away over time, and this is what causes your stick to kind of feel a little bit grindy, feel it moves unevenly, or it feels kind of rough rather than feeling buttery smooth. So this is the usually the first part that goes. It's probably the least durable out of the two that will be worn away. So if you have a stick that's got moderate usage, then it's probably going to have some issues with the bowl. The second part are these black gears. These are moved around by the stick when you move the stick around. So basically the black gears, when they move around the bowl, they actually turn these little optical encoder wheels on that are attached to the bowl, which are detected by the sensors on the board that connects the joystick to the main controller board. So basically this is how the controller detects which way you're actually pushing the stick. And basically over time, it takes longer than wearing out the bowl, but these will also kind of get worn away at the sides, and that's what's going to cause a larger dead zone, so like a stick that's a little more wobbly. So basically, those are the two things. So the bowl gets worn out, and then the gears get worn out. So if your bowl is worn out, you can actually you can just tell this by holding up a regular N64 controller and just grabbing the stick with two fingers and moving it around while pulling it up. And if it feels a lot smoother while doing that, then that's going to be because the bowl is worn out, but the gears are still fine. If you do that and it's still really wobbly and loose, then that means that the gears are also not in good condition. So you can try that for yourself just without even opening up the controller. But yeah, those are going to be your two things that are going to cause an N64 stick to be worn out. Yeah, so basically, if we look at the bowl from the toy stick, we can see that it's a completely different shape. The bottom of it's just not going to fit in the enclosure. And also it uses tiny black gears rather than the optical encoder wheels. So even if you did have a way to make it fit, there's no way to actually put on the optical encoder wheels that are needed for the controller to actually know which way you're pushing it. So the bowl is just completely out of the question, which is a shame because that's going to be the main thing that causes your stick to be worn out. Now the gears, on the other hand, is a little more interesting. Basically, they're not quite the same mold, but one of them can be used in the original controller without any sort of modification. The vertical gear, you can put that in, it'll work just fine. It'll be a little more grindy than an official vertical gear if it's in good shape, but it will work. But the horizontal gears, on the other hand, it's going to be useless for an original controller because basically the teeth of the gear are reversed compared to the original part. So this is not going to fit in the original controller. The board's going to get in the way of it. And even if that wasn't the case, it's not going to be able to move the optical encoder wheel for the controller to actually tell which way you're pushing it. So you can use the vertical gear, but you can't use the horizontal gear. And you also can't use the bowl. So out of the three things that can cause your stick to feel worn out, you can only use one of them from the toy part in the original controller. So really that's not going to be all that helpful for most people. I mean, maybe you have a stick that has a good condition bowl and has a good condition horizontal gear, but a bad condition vertical gear. I don't know how that would ever happen. For that situation, this could be useful, but for most people, it's not going to be enough to fix a stick that's worn out. There's a couple other pieces that can be used in the original stick as well. For one, the actual stick part of it, like the stick base, this you can reuse in the original stick. There's usually not much of a need to do this. This usually doesn't really get worn down unless you have like a really, really heavily used controller. Even then, I'm not really sure I've ever seen it. But basically, you can reuse the stick part. You can also reuse the spring that gives it tension when you're pushing against the black gears. And you can also use this little plastic part that goes over the spring. So those parts you can reuse. It's just those are probably not the parts that are going to be very useful if you have a worn out stick. So in order to just kind of see what it's like if I replace all the parts that can be replaced, I took my N64 stick from the original controller that's in good condition. I took out the vertical gear, I took out the original spring and the plastic part that goes over the spring, as well as the original plastic stick part. And I replaced them all with the parts from the toy stick. So the bowl and the horizontal gear is still original because I can't swap those out. But the vertical gear, the spring, the stick part, and the plastic spring that goes over the spring, those are all the toy parts that are in the original controller. So it does work reasonably well. I'm going to show a couple bits of gameplay showing that, I guess. So here we have Sin and Punishment, which is a really good game for testing out N64 sticks because it's a shooting game with high precision aiming, and it's also a really fun game that I have to cut myself off from playing or else I just keep playing it for hours. But basically, I'm doing pretty well with the new stick. It does feel a little bit more grindy going on the vertical gear. It's not quite as good as the original vertical gear, so moving up and down doesn't feel quite as smooth as going left or right with the original gear. But it is reasonably good. This is usually one of those games that will really bother me if I'm playing with an unofficial stick or like some other replacement parts. Like, so I'd say it's at least better than like the kitsch bent parts or like the N64 gears, which I tried. Better than like a Hori mini controller or like a Brawler 64, but still not quite as good as a regular N64 controller with good condition parts. But again, it barely matters because like if you're not gonna, so if you have a controller that has a bowl in good condition and a horizontal gear in good condition, then you're probably not gonna have much use for a vertical gear. But I mean, maybe there's somebody out there who'd find this useful. And here's some F-Zero X, which is another high precision game, which it does work really well, but I mean, not really much of a surprise because the horizontal gear is still the original one, and that's what you're mostly going to be using for the racing game. But it does at least show that if you need to change out the spring or the stick or whatever, then this would still work pretty well for that. And because I'm sure somebody's going to ask for it, here's me shredding my palms in Mario Party. You know, I might be in pain, but at least I'm not a loser. You know, as a kid, I always wondered why they don't just let go of the rope. Like, I don't know. I guess it's just a thing of honor. I'll die before you get my 5 coins. Yeah, so basically, in summary, the toy stick has some pieces that can be used for an original controller, but none of the important pieces are going to be. So if you're looking to fix up an N64 stick, I'll put a video in the description. This is what I've been following for many years at this point. It is the only thing I've found that really works all that well. But if you're looking to buy the toy sticks, I mean, just buy it as a toy. Don't buy it to really use as parts because, again, there's some parts that you can use for it, but nothing that's really all that useful.